Americans are so used to demonizing socialism.
Funny how that happens after socialism is responsible for over 100 million deaths in the 20th century alone.
But thanks to a 76-year-old self-described democratic socialist,
Okay, she's down with Bernie Sanders. Let's remember this.
we've all heard socialism described by the right. You wait in lines for hours, you eat what little nutrients are available, and everyone wears the same thing.
Which is what actually happened in the Soviet Union, the same Soviet Union that Bernie Sanders praised. It also happened in Cuba and Nicaragua, and at the time Sanders actually said that bread lines were a good thing and a sign of economic health.
Socialism is a favorite straw man of the right, used to disparage any candidate that mentions anything that resembles something like generosity.
It's not generosity when you're talking about funding things through theft and extortion. Generosity and compassion happen when you give up your own money and resources to help people. Advocating that people use guns to take money from other people to give to poor and suffering people is not generous, and it isn't compassionate. It's lazy, self-righteous bullying. How come in study after study it generally ends up being people on the left who are shown to be less compassionate when it comes to the percentage of their own income that they give to charity, or even with things that don't cost money like giving blood? How come it's the United States of America that has by far the highest amount of voluntary private social spending per capita, and how come none of you want to count that when measuring how generous countries are? If you did, the US would be a close second behind France, and France has a greater portion of their population in need. Control for that, and no one does better than the United States. The fact that you don't mention these facts shows that you don't care about the poor or anyone else. You just want to use them as political fodder.
Just because a country has socialist policies doesn't mean it's a socialist country.
Then what does make a country socialist, if not socialist policies?
You can think about socialism as democracy for the economy.
Oh, you mean the powerful running roughshod over individuals with no political power? Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
An economy that takes planning and forethought.
Except that doesn't work. There's a little thing called the economic calculation problem getting in the way of it.
And doesn't just leave wealth distribution to the invisible hand of the market.
Even though it works better when you do it that way, if a country is more capitalist, then it tends to have less income disparity, less wealth inequality, and more upward mobility.
Which, in case you were wondering, looks like this for the 99% of us.
Lie! There has never been a system where the poor come out better than they do under capitalism. This has been shown over and over and over again.
And yet, instead of having an honest conversation
That's the last thing you want.
about what a more democratic economy could look like in a country with the worst income inequality since before the Great Depression,
You mean back when it was a lot more capitalist than it is today?
myth number 1. Socialism's been attempted and failed. But has it truly?
Yes, over and over and over again.
Critics point to examples of leaders who took a twisted version of Marxism and implemented it to the extreme, like Pol Pot of Cambodia or Stalin's Soviet Union.
Back when it looked like things were going great, Bernie Sanders, the guy you like, as well as many others like Paul Samuelson, were saying it was proof that socialism works. And it proved that socialism would last in the long term. It's only once everything went all the crap that they started saying, "Ooh, that's not real socialism." They did the same thing with Venezuela, too. Bernie Sanders even once said that Venezuela had achieved the American dream better than America thanks to its socialist policies. It also had the support of socialist economists like Joseph Stiglitz and Mark Weisbrot. And look what happened.
But those are better examples of totalitarianism than anything else.
Because that's what socialism is. Socialism cannot tolerate private property, and the only way you can eliminate private property is with totalitarianism.
As Noam Chomsky,
By the way, Chomsky also liked Venezuela back when it looked like everything was going great.
the Soviet Union wasn't actually socialist. He says Russia called itself that to trick those sympathetic to socialism.
Can you show him saying that back when it looked like everything was working fine? No? Then shut up! All you have are people bleeding on with a no true Scotsman fallacy as an ad hoc excuse. Notice how we don't have to do that. We can tell you what degree of capitalism countries have just by looking at their economic policies. We can tell you that at the time. We don't have to wait until after the fact and then change our story if things go south. But these guys, at the time, tell you that such and such a country is proof that socialism works and laugh at free market people who are saying it's unsustainable and predicting that it's heading for a fall. Then, after that inevitable fall happens, meaning the free market people were proven right, the socialists don't admit they were wrong. They have to go no true Scotsman. We are the ones making the successful predictions here.
Why judge an ideology on its most extreme examples?
We're judging it by every example. It's just that there aren't any examples that haven't all gone to pot.
I truly hope that somewhere out there is a Spanish language announcer mentioning the failures of capitalism when calling an American soccer game.
Kinda hard to do when you're talking about one of the richest countries in the world.
Yes, Venezuela is going through an insane political crisis right now, but it's not clear that that crisis has anything to do with their socialist policies.
It is absolutely 100% crystal clear. You have insane hyperinflation from the currency their socialist policies have mismanaged. The very same ones that Bernie Sanders wants to implement here. They socialized the oil industry, and now they can't even ship the oil. They socialized the food industry to make sure the people will have enough food and stop those horrible capitalists from being in charge of it. And now there's starvation in a country that has fertile soil and a year-round growing season. A country that, before socialism, was South America's biggest exporter of grain. What is helping Venezuelans right now is the free market. People going against the socialist policies of the government and working in a gray market, using cryptocurrencies like Dash to exchange goods and services outside of any interference by the government.
But what we never hear when discussing Venezuela is how putting their nationalized oil money into social programs led to a dramatic reduction in poverty and an increase in literacy.
Because it didn't! It put the whole country into poverty! Before socialism, and by the way, thanks for the turnaround and finally admitting that they are socialist, but before socialism, they were the richest country in Latin America. Now they're the poorest. They did great during the oil boom, but then, like all socialist countries, they started running out of other people's money.
And how about Cuba? Has socialism failed there?
Yes.
Cuba is not a democracy, for sure, but it also has the highest literacy rate in all of Latin America.
Unless you actually look at the literacy rate instead of just believing what the government says. The Cuban government counts you as literate if you can do as little as write your name. Whereas if you look at actual UN data, you see that literacy gets way better with capitalism, and the literacy gap between men and women gets smaller too.
Not to mention free healthcare and free higher education.
Why don't you look at the actual state of healthcare there instead of just believing Michael Moore? The hospitals they have for tourists are nice, but most patients are put in squalid, unsanitary conditions where they don't even have clean water.
And now they're developing a lung cancer vaccine.
Funny how the company developing it is relying on the US for testing.
Instead, we've been left with vaping.
No, liar. The testing is occurring in the US. And by the way, vaping is at least 95% safer than smoking. It's also a very effective smoking cessation technique. Isn't it a better question to ask why so many people in socialist countries smoke to begin with?
Which is somehow less cool than cancer.
Wow. You'd rather see people get cancer than vaping. That tells us everything we need to know about you.
Another myth we hear is that socialism is too expensive. But too expensive for who? In France, the government covers all or pays back at least 70% of healthcare costs.
Yeah, and their unemployment has been double digit for how many decades? I'm just gonna ignore everything else she says about healthcare and instead point to my video, How to Argue for Universal Healthcare, because she doesn't say anything that isn't debunked there.
What about students? Is socialism too expensive for them? Because in many countries around the world, university tuition is essentially free.
I'm going to skip all the university education stuff because it's been debunked at length too. Before government started monopolizing higher education, even a poor person could afford college with a summer job and no debt. And one reason why it was so cheap was because there were so many other options, including informal educational options like Chautauqua's. Just like the free market is creating new options today, including free options like Khan Academy. People in socialist countries are not being provided higher education. They're being made dependent on it. There's a difference.
But take Denmark.
Denmark is not socialist. Their prime minister has said so under no uncertain terms. They are a market-based economy. They score the same as the U.S. on the Index of Economic Freedom. Denmark is not a socialist country. Get over it.
The government spends a lot on job training and education, especially for the unemployed.
If that's really a benefit to employers, then they'll provide it themselves, like they actually do when government doesn't get in the way.
Okay, this myth I really don't understand the logic of. If there are more people paying more taxes into a social welfare state, doesn't that mean more money?
You know, this is what really galls me about you ignorant, supercilious socialists. You bleed on like you did early in this video about how it's so radical for you to ask other people to read when it's clear that you haven't read anything outside of your pathetic echo chamber. If you'd even read so much as an Econ 101 textbook, you'd understand the problem with this. Greater taxation for social programs means even greater entitlements, and it's unsustainable. A smaller economy is still unsustainable, but it can kick the can down the road a little bit longer than a big economy can. We already have far more unfunded entitlements than we'll be able to provide for, as my video How to Argue for Social Security shows. How do you think you're going to fix this problem by adding to it?
Another myth about socialism is that it requires big government, and that government is not democratic. But look at Norway, a country whose economic model has been called a 21st century version of socialism.
It's been called that by people who don't know what it is. And my regular viewers should have caught the passive voice on that one. That's a sure indication that someone's hiding something. It's not socialism. Norway is rated mostly free on the Index of Economic Freedom with a score of 74.3 compared to 75.7 for the United States. They're less than a point and a half behind us.
When all of the myths above fail them, conservatives always resort to a final myth about socialism, which is capitalism is better.
According to every single economic metric, it is.
Sure, it's claimed as many, if not more, lives than socialism.
Just tell me where in the world you find these angels who are going to organize society for us.
In Norway! We've been over this!
Norway isn't socialist! We've been over this! Oh, but you know so much more than a Nobel Prize-winning economist. Can anyone say Dunning-Kruger? Maybe you should listen to Friedman when he said, "A society that values equality over liberty will end up with neither one, but a society that values liberty over equality will wind up with a great measure of both."
But listen, I am happy to be proven wrong.
No, you're not! Because all of this information is at your fingertips. You're either deliberately lying about it, or you haven't bothered looking.
Hey, conservative panel, what do you think about all these socialist myths?
They're not myths. They're not myths at all. Generosity is evil. If you give people free handouts, they're gonna have to eat rats out of buckets. And don't ask me to link cause and effects. Cause and effect is fake news.
Mr. Strawman, give me a break.
Capitalism is built on greed, which, as it turns out, is not best for either people or business, or the planet.
Funny how there's less pollution with capitalist countries. Greed is a fact of life. It exists everywhere you have people, and it's a prime reason why socialism fails so hard. What capitalism does is provide the only effective means ever found of tempering greed: loss aversion. Companies and individuals in a free market realize very quickly that if they get too greedy, they set themselves up for a fall. That gives them the incentive to be less greedy and act with more enlightened self-interest. But in a socialist country, the message is, if you fail, don't worry about it, because there's a safety net. So be as greedy as you want, without consequence. This is precisely what has caused economic busts like the Great Depression and the housing crisis. There's nothing in this video that hasn't been debunked a billion times already, and yet she says it with all of the same supercilious condescension that we've come to expect from peddlers of this woo. It'd be hilarious if they weren't talking about something that kills hundreds of millions of people. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, why not hit like and subscribe? And to make sure I can produce more, support this channel on Patreon and Maker Support. And check out all the other great content here, like this video selected especially for you.